All right, welcome back to the Picking Your Brain podcast, where we interview people doing ministry at a high level. And on today's episode, we have Jason Lovins. What's up, Jason?
Hey Blake, how you doing, buddy?
Man, I'm so excited to have you. If you don't know Jason, I'll give him a second. I'll give him a second to introduce himself. But he is part of a band which our church has had in 5, 6, 7 times on it several times, and been able to do other ministry events with. They're just so thankful for him and his ministry. But he's also got a really nice golf swing. That's if that matters to anybody. He's got a really nice golf swing.
I was going to say, you and I typically are having these conversations on the golf course.
Yes, those are fun. Those are fun. I love it when y'all come in, because Gavin's like, "Hey, will you make sure the guys go play golf?" I said, "Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that burden on. I'll go take that burden."
Oh, I love it.
So
I love it.
love it. But well, Jason, some people may not know who you are, so they don't know. Will you just explain kind of what you're doing, what the Lord has you doing, and where you're serving, all those things?
Yeah, so I mean, I've seen a few of the guys you've had on. I guess I might be a little different. I live in Ashland, Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky. It's right on the border of Ohio and West Virginia. I grew up over in Canova, West Virginia, just right across the river. And this has always been kind of home base for us. And I went to college at Morehead State University in Eastern Kentucky, and only about an hour away from where I live now, and where even from home. My home is literally 15 minutes down and across the river, so I'm still close to home. But this
Yeah.
whole tri-state area, it all is kind of the same. But so with the band started in college, and then it just kind of kept going. We were doing camps and doing different things, and before I knew it, I was on the road full time, and didn't even have time for a part-time job. And we've been doing it now for a long time, and we travel just about every week of the year. We average um, about 40 weeks a year, and it's mostly weekends. I always joke and say, like, we're home enough that our wives know us and like us for the most part. But so we're home a lot, but we do go, on stints where, like the next 5 weeks, we're basically out Thursday night through Sunday night, and we're home.
Yeah.
But like this coming weekend, we leave Saturday and we're home Sunday night.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
then there may be times where we're gone, a week or two, but those are kind of sporadic. But all that to say, we travel full time, and have for a long time now, and it's not something I meant to happen, and it just kind of happened, and so I've never even served a church full time, and
Yeah.
so it's been a little different journey, but it's been incredible nonetheless, and the Lord's done some really neat things, and half the time I feel like I'm just hanging on for dear life and thankful to be a part of it. So that's kind of the gist of what we do. But we're a worship band, so um, it's different every week. I mean, we try to facilitate that experience, whatever that looks like. And um, I was actually just talking to a guy earlier, and he said, "So, how would you describe you guys?" And I said, it's hard because I always use the example when we did the Louisiana YEC a couple years ago. I
Hmm.
always tell them it was us and Crowder. Clayton King was preaching, and there were 5,000 kids, and we were
Yeah.
like a rock and worship band. And then the next week, we were in Georgia singing to like 400 old people, leading
Yeah.
worship, like old people conference. And we do a bunch of gospel songs, and that's kind of how it's always been.
Yeah.
So I don't even know how you describe us, to be honest. But we just always tried to, facilitate a worship experience, and whatever that looks like to get that job done. That's kind of what we've done. And so um, that's the best way I even know to explain it, because I know it's not normal. So
Yeah. Well, no, I know our church always gets excited when you get to come lead on a Sunday morning. But y'all have been a part of some really big events, like some Billy Graham evangelistic, events you got to do.
yeah.
But what I love most about y'all is, and we've had several different groups come in, but y'all are just the friendliest. Just I love spending time with y'all, and we've never had anybody that's like jerks that come in, but y'all
Yeah,
are just fun to talk with and just spend time with. And so to me, I love your worship. That's great too. But you're just a man that is just really fun. It's obvious you love the Lord. You have a really cool story. I won't spoil it here for anybody that may book you,
sure.
but you have a great story that the Lord's using. And anyway, just I'm
Yeah.
pumped to have you on tonight today.
Well, I appreciate that, man. You know, um, it's been really cool, and I've got a great group of guys, and people ask me all the time, like, "Do you guys like really get along that well all the time?" And like, yeah, we really do.
Yeah,
This just wouldn't work if we didn't, because we are
yeah,
together so much, um, and relationships matter, and
mhm.
I've I've developed some of my best friends by doing ministry like this, and I just can't imagine. I mean, I could introduce you to a few of those jerks that are along the way, but
Mhm.
thankfully we're not that, and I appreciate you saying
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, no, I mean, because and that's the difference between you're trying to bring in people you've had before. It's like who's easy to work with and who's a pleasure to be, who's a pleasure to be with and who's not. And so y'all are
Yeah.
easily some of the ones I'm like, I look forward to them coming. They're just great to hang out with.
Well, I
But
appreciate
anyway,
that.
we can keep going back and forth, man. Because we're friends. But hey, just real quick, Jason, the format of the podcast is gonna be super simple. I'm just gonna ask you a few questions about you as a minister, how you think through things, how you do ministry, so we can learn from you today. And so
Sure,
the first question we'll start off with, and
I'll do my best.
I usually rotate this first question for different guys, and I really was interested to hear your answer for this. But what does your quiet time look like? Because, like you said, you're on the road a lot, and so that may not always be at home at the dining room table. So, what does it
Yeah,
look like for you to your time with the Lord in the mornings or in the nighttime?
yeah. It's funny. The I just read Psalm 42, and um, here, so I'll give you like the real answer and not the Sunday school church camp
Yeah,
answer that I've heard my whole life. And like for me, I've always struggled with this, always.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I remember my first summer of camp, big camp. I did huge camps back in the day, and you have this built-in quiet time every morning, so it was great.
yeah,
I mean, you have
yeah,
kind of a structure, and our camp pastor that first summer was Tony Marita. Have you know Tony? Have you ever met
yeah,
Tony?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I've heard him preach. He's great.
he's amazing. And so he was still in seminary at the time. But this joker would read more books than anybody had ever seen in my life. And I'm just not a reader. I've always struggled with that. Um, and I just really had a desire to become that. And it is still just a struggle to me. So what happens is when I do feel like I'm out of structure because we do travel so much,
Yeah,
and I'm not a morning person. Everybody's always like, get up in the morning, and like I'm like, that sounds amazing, but I've just never been that guy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
And
get
so,
that.
and so I remember when I was a teenager, I went on a ski trip, um, and our band pastor, who's literally been our band pastor my whole career, he was my youth pastor, and I guess I was probably about 16 or 17 years old, maybe 17. And he brought in this guy who, on the ski trip, he was kind of like the preacher for the weekend, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and he, one, introduced me to Rich Mullins, who I really didn't know.
Mhm.
And I remember he had a VHS tape of Rich Mullins' final concert that they had. I think you can even find it on YouTube now.
Okay.
But that just rocked my world. And I remember that weekend. But the one thing I remember, and still, I mean, I'm 42 years old. Um, and still to this day, this is something I go back to. I remember him explaining, how important this was, this quiet time, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
And he said there'll be moments when you just feel like you're just you just don't even know where to go, right?
Mhm.
And he said, if you can just get in a habit every year of reading the Psalm of your age, and
Okay.
he said, just one thing to just you always have that to go back to. Um,
Mm.
and I have done that all these years. When I feel like I'm just like, man, I I'm going a million different ways. That whole idea of quiet time, like what does that really look like to like be still
Yeah.
and just listen? And I've never heard the Lord speak audibly to me,
Yeah.
but He very much will prompt you in other ways and all that.
Yeah.
And um, it's been really neat to always just kind of have that to fall back on. And so, like, especially the past several days, really even the past several weeks, because um, we've just been really busy. And then I got sick. I had the flu. I haven't had the flu in years. I mean, like maybe 15 years. And I had the flu a few weeks ago and it wiped me out for a week. And, just life happens.
Mhm.
And I always thought, man, that is so neat that I've kind of had that. And I never thought about it. Um, but even just today reading, I went back and read Psalm 42, and some of these, like half of it I don't even understand sometimes with where it's going, but it's that one thing to always go back to. And then what happens is it funnels into other things, and you start reading the word in different places. And so yeah, that's a long answer to say, like, I wish I could tell you I was that guy that was super structured and like I
Yeah,
had
yeah.
this and um, but I'm just not. And I've always struggled with that. I've always had a desire to be better at it. Um, and it's a continued battle, but I'm battling. That's the key,
Yeah.
like
Absolutely.
I'm doing it. So that's the one thing I always say is like, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. Do something.
Yeah.
Um, and so the past couple of days, that's when I just feel like I'm going a million different ways. At least I know I'm always going to go back to that. And that's something I've done every year since I was, I think I was 17 maybe. So every year, and I try to do it on my birthday to start that new one
Mhm.
every year. And so yeah, just little things like that. Maybe not the most super spiritual answer you're going to get out of these
No.
guys, but
No, that's
um, that's something that I've always tried to do.
no, I think that's cool. That's something to yeah. If you just have a moment, I know I need to get in God's word. Where can I jump to? That's really I never heard that. That's cool.
And I never
So
heard it since.
yeah, yeah. So maybe that's a new trend we'll start. So the second question. So I asked this to Aaron Watson. He was our other guy that has led worship or leads worship. Like as pastors, we always have pastors we love to listen to or preaching styles we like to listen to. But as a worship leader, who is somebody that is a worship leader or a band that you find inspiration from or that you enjoy listening to? Who is that for you?
That's a great question. I'm old enough now that I've been through a few generations.
Yeah.
Um, and so, back in the day when I first was starting, this whole worship thing was still pretty new. Now it's
Hmm.
like its own genre and like it has its own radio. I mean, I was it is it Air One Radio that is now like only worship or something. I think I
Yeah.
saw that a while ago. That was not the case, 20 years ago, and
Hmm.
so back in the day, it was the token like passion guys like Chris Tomlin, Matt Redman, Charlie Hall, Crowder was
Hmm.
thrown in there, and the David Crowder band was like on a whole other level.
Yeah.
And that was what everybody was like, oh my goodness, like how are they doing that? So those are like the core guys for me that were really just the soundtrack of our life during that time. Um, and so I still go back to that a lot. Some of the newer stuff. It's funny you say that because we've been really trying to dive in and kind of see what some of the newer songs are that we want to have in our pocket, you know, because we really do try to
Yeah.
always have a few of the new songs that we need to pull out when we do, you know. Um, I mean, I don't think anybody can deny. I think Phil Wickham is kind of the
Oh,
new Chris Tomlin in the sense of it seems like the church is singing more of his songs than any other.
yeah.
And that's how it was back in the day for Tomlin. It was like every song was a Tomlin song, it seemed like, you
Yeah.
know. And so I have mad respect for people that can sit down and write those kind of songs for the church, you know.
Mhm.
Um, I I'm super interested in the Gettys and all. I really am not gotten
Okay.
into them, to be honest with you. But I'm just you hear so much about them. I literally had a guy tell me today. He was texting me about this guitar thing, and he said, "Hey, I'm leading this Getty song. You should check it out." And so I'm going to make myself dive into them a little more because I do love hymns. I mean, we've always. I mean, I've recorded 3 hymns albums, and we
Yeah.
wrote a hymn with another worship pastor that we just released called Pilgrim Road, and
Yeah.
it's literally a hymn. I mean, it's straight up verses and refrains, you know,
Mhm.
and it's deep. I mean, it's really pretty cool. And I say that because I didn't really have much to do with the writing. I added a few songs or a few words. Um, but this kid, he wrote this hymn and sent it to me and wanted me to help him kind of put it together. And it is just sharing the gospel from Genesis all the way to Revelation. I mean, it's really neat. And so we've been doing that one a lot, and so that's another weird thing that like when you're doing your own thing, I find myself sometimes not listening to music, and I'll just go to podcasts because
Yeah.
um, I want to kind of keep my head in what we're doing, and but then once that's done, like the recording process, you know,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
then I'll start diving back into more worship music and um, but you know, the Passion guys have always been probably my biggest go-to, and even the newer ones. I mean, you know, Christian Stanfield, I just love. I love his heart.
Mhm.
But Matt Redman is a big one as well because way back in the day, you know, you've got the Heart of Worship and all these songs that he wrote,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
he put out a little book talking about that song Heart of Worship
Okay.
um, that I remember reading and telling the story of that song and how it happened and that was life changing for me. But also I'll tell you this because I'm super excited. We just booked. It's not even like public knowledge yet, but we're doing a thing with Mac Powell from Third Day, who I've never
Oh, wow.
met. We've played with all these bands, but he's the one I've never met. And Third Day for me was huge. Um, really, one of my first, what I feel like was first true like worship experiences was at my first Third Day concert during the Offerings tour back in the day, and it just rocked my world and so they've always been a big part of what I've done and you know they put out a few worship records as well and
Yeah.
so they were a big soundtrack for me so those are a few.
I got you. And saying that reminds me, like this last week, I don't know what made me do this, but I feel like I was an old person. I said I want to put a playlist together of all the songs I worshipped when I was a youth, and so I
Yeah,
put together like 20 or 30 songs on a playlist of all the songs we sang. Heart of Worship was one of them. Just all these
yeah,
type of songs. And my worship this last week, just kind of privately, has been so good. Like all these
yeah.
songs that like I remember God making commitments in my life, or me making commitments to God, and all these things. And so I get what you're saying about just going back to that foundation of your faith and where you were. Anyway, yeah. So
and
I don't know why this week that's been me.
you know what's cool is on the new Passion record, I got to see a few live streams of the big Passion event back in January. They
Yeah,
always
yeah.
do, and they busted out some like old '90s worship tunes, um,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been seeing these songs pop up more and more as we've
Mm-hmm.
been looking for songs like the old song, "I'm trading my sorrows," like, yes, Lord, yes, Lord," that song.
Yeah.
I saw one that was posted, like, 6 months ago, and it was, like, the coolest version that this church had put on. Um, so even that is kind of circling back around, which is super cool, I think.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, you know what I tell a lot of churches, Blake? I think it's so neat that God uses music, to give us markers in our lives. Um,
Yeah.
and I always use the example of, I could say the words, "Because he lives, I can face tomorrow." And so many people
Mhm.
in the congregation, that song takes them to a place.
Mhm.
And songs for me, um, like "Here I Am to Worship," that song is really old now,
Yep.
but when that song was new, um, it just rocked my world, and I
Yep.
remember just certain places I was singing that song, and so, yeah, I think it's so neat that we have music and we can go back and it takes us to places. I just think it's neat that the Lord does that.
Yeah, and I'm sure Hunter's our worship pastor. If you're listening, don't know who Hunter is. Hunter is has been adding some of those older songs into our modern worship, and like students are like, "Oh, is this a new one?" I'm like, "No, we
Yeah,
sang this when I was a kid." It's like, but
yeah,
this is a good one. So anyway, yeah, that's cool. So we'll move on to the next question. And so I wrote down, how did you know that you were called to travel leading worship and not necessarily staying in a local church? Because the easy answer is, if you're good at music, you like music, is let me just find a local church, plug into, and do that. And
yeah.
like you kind of mentioned a little bit in your intro, but how did you distinguish that's where I feel like God's calling me to?
Sure. I can remember the day vividly, but kind of leading up to that, my whole life, my grandma had a gospel group, and so they were always in church, somewhere singing every night. It felt like, and
Mm-hmm.
so I was in church a lot as a kid growing up, and I'd get up as a little kid and do the special song, with the group, and I would sing in church on Sundays when I was asked, and but so I had that whole world happening. But then over here, you know, um, when I was in middle school, if you would have asked me what I'm going to do when I grew up, I would have told you I was going to be the next Garth Brooks, and I was pretty serious about that. So I always just kind of had this in the back of my mind, I think. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the Lord just is so kind in how He writes our stories, and maybe was giving me those desires with me not even really knowing what that's going to look like. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then in the ninth grade, I got invited to the big Baptist church in town. They had a big youth group. My little youth group was like me and my cousins, and so like I didn't even know there was a lot of other kids like me. And because I got saved when I was 8 years old, I mean, I just my grandma was so such a big deal in my walk, and that was just what we did. And so all of a sudden I show up to this youth group, and they're singing all these praise and worship songs I had never heard before. I'd never seen a praise band. um, I didn't even know that was a thing, right? And um, and so all of a sudden I'm starting to see that, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And then like this guy walks in the door one day, everybody's freaking out. I'm the only one that doesn't know who it is. It's Michael W. Smith. He's from my
Oh wow.
church, he's from that town. I had no idea who he was, right? And
Yeah.
so that rocked my world when I figured out that he is like a global
Yeah.
superstar in that. And that sounds ridiculous to say, but I mean, he kind of was.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that just was like, whoa, wait a minute. There's this guy who is from here who's doing that. And so
Mm-hmm.
I had people in that church who knew Michael, and they called him Mike. And would always tell me like, hey, he did it. There's no reason you can't do it too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just so encouraging with that. but it never really started until I went to college. And I went to college to play golf. I thought like this is my path. I'm going to be doing this, and and the Lord really just kind of took it away for a little while, and that's when my band started. And so all of a sudden, I had a worship band, and it was like we didn't really know we were a worship band, but that's kind of what we were, you know.
Hmm.
And we got invited to do that first summer of Fuge Camp, and I was very open with them walking into that summer that I am not a worship leader. I'm too scared to even call myself that.
Hmm.
But I can sing these songs for you all day long. And so I later found out that they purposely put us with some of those people like Tony Marita, who was on staff, and now his wife, who they weren't even dating at the time, but she was our assistant director, Kim, and she's a true worship leader. And they
Wow.
really took me under their wing and kind of showed me the way. And it was a week or two in to that camp. We were there for 8 weeks in front of hundreds of kids every night, hundreds of churches. But I remember the night where they were just singing their hearts out, and it was just this beautiful moment where I stepped back from the microphone, and I literally was so overwhelmed that I fell to my knees. And I'm not that guy, you know.
Yeah. 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 No.
But
Yeah.
it was so overwhelming that I fell to my knees, and in that moment, I remember thinking, "Okay, I get it. This is it, and this is the moment that I'll chase for the rest of my life." It
Yeah.
was so clear that God had given me this to be able to do this. And once
Hmm.
that happened, nothing else mattered. I could have cared less about going to Nashville and getting a record deal. Um, like it all became just about that and chasing that moment. And I
Yeah.
remember thinking, like, I will say yes every chance I get if I know that I can have an opportunity to get to that moment.
Yeah.
And if I've ever done anything the past 20 years, it's been that we really have tried to do that, and so I didn't mean for it to happen; it just happened. And then you start to travel, and then it kind of kept growing and it kept growing. I worked a part-time job for a little while, but then we would go back and do camp every summer, and basically I could book myself the whole year until the next summer. Um,
Yeah.
and then, I meet people like Brandon, early on in that time who really just loved on me and showed me like, hey, you guys, you're built to do this, and like let's figure out how to help you keep doing it and do it more, and just
Hmm.
always was right there, in our corner, pushing us along and helping us, and more people like that came along, and so all that to say, when I had some friends that all of a sudden were going to Nashville getting record deals, and we were just too busy on the road already, and so it just never
Hmm.
became the focus. And then as it grew, I had I would get a church that would say, hey, would you want to talk about being our worship pastor? And I just remember saying like I'm not trying to keep this thing happening. Like it just keeps happening. And so until
Hmm.
the Lord changes that, I don't know how I would walk away from that.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so that's kind of the gist of it. I did serve a little church part-time in the very beginning. Um and uh and that changed everything. Through those few months I was there, um I met a guy that paid for my first album, bought me a bunch of gear, and so the Lord put us there for that moment. For that, I'm sure of it. And then we kind of went on, and so it's been like this ever since.
I got you. And my story is similar at that you had a desire to lead and do things in that in the music realm, but then God showed you, okay, I've equipped you in that way for this purpose. I've always felt
Yeah,
like I wanted to be around teenagers and students. I wanted to be a coach my whole life. I felt like that's what the desire God gave me to help lead men and students. to be better men, like you're going to grow up to be men. And then once I saw, no, I want you to be in student ministry to lead them to the Lord and help them that way. It's like God's equipped us even before we realize what for. He's equipped us
Yeah.
for what He has for us, and so that was just cool story. And I never heard that from you. That's cool.
Yeah.
Um, all right. The next question I had was, what is one of the most unique events that you were able to lead, and kind of what made it stand out? And that could be either this big evangelistic event that you're a part of, like a Billy Graham type event, or even at a church, at another church that's listening and can maybe replicate. What's some events that maybe you say, hey, these were really cool?
Man, there's so many.
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned the YEC for Louisiana. I mean,
Mhm.
that was that was a cool just moment for us, just being
Yeah.
there. Crowder was there, Clayton King, and then of course Brandon, he was the one making that happen. So that was a big moment for all of us because, he and I had gone so far back. Um, and so that was big. But there's so many. Gosh, there's so many. We did a Billy Graham crusade in Arizona, out like in a rodeo arena, which was pretty cool. And but before that, they actually, like, I totally backdoored my way into doing Billy Graham events. And I just noticed that picture of me behind on my shoulder. That is, my wife put all those on the wall. That is from my original album. Um, you can't see it very well, but I'll text you a picture of it. That's from like 2005.
Oh wow.
Anyway, sorry. Um, the We totally backdoored our way into these Billy Graham events. I'm playing golf in Charlotte one day with a friend of mine, and I get paired up with his father and son. Don't know who they are, and sure enough, the father was one of the vice presidents who later became chief of staff over everybody. Franklin was his only boss, and he
Wow.
just took a liking to us and totally backdoored us into all these events. And so, one of the coolest things that I remember that really stood out was, he didn't know us, and I happened to have a CD in my car that day. We played golf, and I never keep CDs in my car. Um, this was before, like, even really Spotify or anything was a thing, right? And and so I gave him a CD, and he said, "I'll be in touch." And so he called me one day. He said, "Hey, I need to know, like, whenever you're in Charlotte, we do a or we do like a little, Bible study every morning before work starts in the home office. They do like a little devotion every morning." And
Hmm.
he said, "There's about 350 staff members that work here, and we do a little thing every morning. I may have you come in and do that." I'm like, "Oh, okay, great." I mean, I'm, thrilled. And so Rodney, my piano player, who
Hmm.
who is just an amazing piano player, he's an even better person.
Yes.
He
Yes.
uh, he just had a birthday a couple days ago, turned the big 40, which was just, I can't even
Oh
believe it.
wow.
Um, and yeah, and it was just me and him, and we were going to Charlotte to do this like trade show thing where we're going to sing in the booth for like Sennheiser microphones, right? Just like a little thing. And and so I told him, I said, "Hey, my band's not there, but Rodney and I are there, and if you want us to do something." And he said, "Great, show up here." I think we had to be there at like 7:15, and then it started at like 7:40, and it's done by 8 o'clock, and they all go to their offices and start their workday. And
Hmm.
so again, he doesn't know us, and as we get up there, he said, "Hey, you got 3 songs." So okay, cool. He said, "Just lead them in worship, whatever you do." And again, he never even heard us play a note. And
Oh
I
yeah.
said, "Okay." And so we did, and I think we did like a version of "I'll Fly Away." And again, it's just me and Rodney,
Yeah.
which is not normal. We normally have the full band, but they were up just clapping and singing. And but I didn't tell you this. So before we started singing that day, he pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, I just want you to know, um, if they don't respond the way you're used to having people respond, these people have had everybody from Bill Gaither to Michael W. Smith." And so he
Oh
was
wow.
setting me up for failure just in case,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I
No
was like,
pressure.
"Okay, cool, yeah, no pressure." And so we go to our thing, and still to this day, I don't know that I've ever heard Rodney play a solo like that. And it was on this big grand
Mm.
piano, and he was just going to town on this thing, right? And it was just a cool moment. The Lord was moving, and within those 3 songs, I mean, we straight just had a worship service with these people, and he was over to the
That's cool.
side like, "What is happening?" And so that was just one of the coolest moments of my life, and, um, and that opened the door to we've now done countless events for them, and it's always, I mean, it's a big deal. It's always an honor, to get to do anything with them, just there's a million of those kind of stories, but that's kind of the one that stood out to me just now, thinking like, because I remember thinking like, I am just a hillbilly kid from the Appalachian Mountains, and I've got no business being here. But yet, for some reason, the Lord just walked me right through the front door. And
Mhm.
and so, taking ownership of that, of knowing like, um, this is what God has for you. You better bring your best. And
Yeah,
um, and so we've really tried to do that, ever since. And so it's been neat.
that's cool. We'll transition out with this question. What are some tangible differences that you've seen from churches that actually worship at the events you lead? I'm sure you've been in some churches where you're like, man, this church is dead as, it's just dead. Then there's some
Yeah.
churches you come into, you're like, my goodness, man, it's obvious the spirit is here. What are some
Yeah.
ways you can just tell that, man, this church obviously loves the Lord and is worshiping? What have you seen as you've traveled across the country?
Um, man, we've seen a lot.
Yeah.
You know, I've I've told people that, I've been to some very big churches in my time that don't even exist anymore. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking churches that ran over 1,000 people that don't exist anymore,
Hmm.
within 15 years. And
Yeah.
so, um, I've seen that, and that's scary. And it goes back into so many things. I mean, not keeping the main thing, and just get so caught up in the business of church that we miss the whole point.
Yeah.
But I tell you, I kind of have this theory, and I really have nothing to back it up on other than just kind of what we've seen. But um, a lot like churches respond in music, during the worship time differently. And I think sometimes it kind of falls back on how the pastor, um, worships. Um, and I say that because, like, I go some places where, and not everybody's super into music, right? And that's
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah. Mhm.
Everybody's personality is different, but we have found that a lot of times when the pastor is like really into it, um, it funnels out into everybody else, and they're super into it, because we've also been to churches where the pastor is just very stoic, and that's his personality. Um,
Yeah.
loves music, but like is not really showing it, and you
Mhm.
see the church is not really showing it either. And then you get done and you think like, man, did we just miss it here? Like, was it us? Like, what did we miss? But
Mhm.
then people come to us afterwards and they're like, thank you, the Lord really used you today, and blah blah blah, and they're like, they just loved it.
Yeah.
But it was like, can you tell your faces that you loved it so we can see, you know um
Yeah.
but they really did. And so I have found that sometimes that has become more true often than not, and that's okay. I mean, it's just people are different,
Yeah.
but it seems like that is kind of an ongoing theme that we found, and so you know, um, I don't know that I would say one's wrong or not, other than
Yeah.
it's just personalities. But it is interesting when you see how like the church staff responds and how it kind of funnels out into because you know we say worship leaders that are on stage,
Yeah.
but often that staff that's sitting on the front row or wherever they are, like people are
Hmm.
paying attention to them too, especially the pastor.
Yeah.
Um, and your pastor is a great example. I mean, he's in it,
He is.
and he's
Yeah.
there. Um, and it funnels out into your church, and your church is one of the easiest churches to lead in worship. Um,
Mhm.
and so there's that culture that happens. Um, and but again, I've seen it the other way where the pastor's super stoic and the church kind of becomes that, but
Mhm.
they still really love it. They just don't show it as well. So I
Yeah.
don't know. There's something to that.
Well, that's I don't know if you heard the episode with Aaron. I mentioned him earlier, but I asked him a similar question, and I said, how do you create an atmosphere of worship in the church? Because he's a local church worship pastor, and he says,
Yeah.
he said pretty much the same thing you said. He said, our pastor's on the front row, he's into worship. Our student pastor's over on the side, he's engaged. Our discipleship guy, he's back here. Our executive pastor, he's in the back. He said it's when these people, the staff, the people that are our leaders, when they're engaged in worship, that just trickles out to everyone else. And so they're not focused on what's happening after this. What's the next announcement that I have to make, or the pastor's fiddling with his notes. Like, what am I supposed to be saying next? No, we're all engaged in this moment of worship. And so it rings true now to me too, hearing from you that's what you see from church to church. That it's
Yeah.
not just who's on stage leading, but who actually leads the church the rest of the time too. Anyway, that was just
Yeah,
cool.
I think it's huge, and we really have seen that a lot. And I mean, even just this weekend, we were at a church in West Virginia. We've been there several times. One of the best churches in our area right now, and the pastor's been there 40 years. Um, and he is not that guy that's just up there just getting after it, but
Hmm.
he's super engaged. um, and it was one of those moments where the plan for the service was me to do just a typical. He wanted to give me like 30 to 40 minutes, and he told me, um, I've got a little sermon at the end that I might go 25 minutes, and the time was fine for all that. And that dude got right up there and said, "You know what? I'm not even going to preach what I had for this morning because I just need to know, like, do you know Jesus?" And went right into this gospel presentation and
Wow.
gave an invitation, and like multiple people got saved. It was so sweet how he did it too. And so just he was engaged, right? So I think that's really
Hmm.
kind of what we're getting back to is just being engaged, because I've seen it when it's not that. And like for you, like and with what you do, I've seen the youth pastor who was sitting in the audience and was not engaged at all. um
Hmm.
and that doesn't mean be jumping up and
Yeah,
down, and not even the point.
absolutely.
It's just whatever that engagement looks like for you. But I've
Yes.
seen it, and then their kids are like not they could care less. Um, and so yeah, maybe that is a thing we need to talk about more because I think it does ring true.
Yeah. Man,
That's
Jason,
cool
that
that
was
you said
good.
that. I've never really heard anybody talk about it. I've really not even talked about it much. I mean, we talk about it on the bus,
Yeah.
amongst the band. Um, so that's neat that guy. I caught some of that. I'll go back and watch it because
Yes, the second
that's
episode, Aaron Watson is his name.
that's neat that he said that, because I do. I think that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just as a youth pastor, my job isn't just to teach middle schoolers the Bible on Wednesday night. It's to lead them and how do we become a follower of Jesus. And so that's also, I'm a worship, and I've heard somebody say this is cheesy, but we're all worship leaders. We're all leading in how we
Absolutely.
worship. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's a good
absolutely.
note to end on there.
Yeah, man.
uh, well, Jason, again, thank you so much for giving us some time today. Just spend time walking through kind of your life, your ministry, how God's used you. And then we ended really on a good note here on how we, as people that are in ministry, God's called us to more than just opening God's word, which is great, but we're to lead our church in the different areas of our own spiritual walk. And so, anyway,
Yeah, big deal.
thanks again for being here, Jason.
Thank you, Blake. It's my pleasure, buddy.
Yeah. Well, if this is your first time listening to the Picking Your Brain podcast, we'd love for you to follow us. We're on YouTube, on Spotify. We're slowly getting on other platforms as well, but just find us at Picking Your Brain Ministry Podcast. This is our last episode for season 1. We're going to take a few weeks off, and then we have some great guests lined up for season 2. So make sure you plug into our Instagram, Facebook, so you don't miss when the next season drops. We'll catch y'all soon.